Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Cradle Book 11, Dreadgod, chapters 7 and 8. In these chapters, Lindon goes to visit Mercy, who had just had a conversation that was very suggestive with her mother that maybe Lindon was up to no good, and Mercy is kind of falling for it. Mercy. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. Andy, if you are out there, hello. Really quick before we get started, I wanted to mention to everybody that there is a new thing happening in Discord that they have just added called forums. And I know that the way Discord has been set up wasn't everyone's cup of tea because it felt weird to jump in on conversations that maybe happened like days earlier, or come in with a complete change in topic in the middle of a conversation that's currently happening. So they added forums in order to kind of do the more old-fashioned thing where you have a consistent topic that people can come and comment on whenever, and you can start your own, post as well. And I'm pretty excited about it because that's the main issue for most people that I've talked to with Discord, is that it sort of feels like you have to be there at the same time as other people to have an actual conversation. Whereas on Facebook, you can show up and comment and then leave, and somebody will reply eventually. And it's just a lot easier to interact on your own time on Facebook, which I completely agree with, to be honest. And the addition of forums, I'm really excited because it'll just be a lot easier for certain things to have an extended conversation about. So there is a category on our Discord server called Spoil Me, and that's all the stuff I'm covering for Spoil Me, and they have their own spoiler channels, but I also added the names of those properties as tags in the forum. So you can make a post about Cradle and tag it, and you can also tag spoilers in case you're talking about something that is beyond the point I have currently covered. So just wanted to let you guys know in case Discord was not really doing it for you, but this new format does, because I think it will be a lot easier to work with, and I wouldn't be surprised if the forums sort of take over channels entirely and replace them in at least our server. So I'm pretty excited about it. I just wanted to put it out there. Everybody can come to the server too. It's not patrons only. There's a patrons only section, but there's plenty to interact with if you are not a patron. So, got a lot of people here, guys. Yay, everybody. All right. So let's talk about this first chapter. Chapter 7 is pretty much all Mercy centric. And we start off with her dealing with putting people's minds at ease. I love the way that this is described. She's thinking about how she's better at reassuring folks than anybody else in her family, which makes total sense. And I love this. Even if Uncle Fury were still here, he was fundamentally incapable of listening to anything that sounded boring, which meant most things. His version of reassurance was, "Don't worry, I'll kill it." And I was laughing so hard because as soon as Fury was brought up, my immediate instinct was, yeah, his solution to any grievance anybody would bring up is to fight. So that being followed up immediately, I was like, oh, I'm so gratified right now. Aunt Charity was a great listener, but people tended to find her unnerving. It was rare they walked away reassured rather than pressured, which, yeah, Charity doesn't display any empathy. The whole thing with her is being stoic and stone-faced and immovable and seemingly unaffected by anything that's happening around her. And I definitely understand, especially being in a position of power, how useful it probably is to keep that front up. It's not going to be something that's going to make people feel better or feel like you're being honest with them either. And I think that's part of what works for Mercy, is that she seems so empathetic that you really would get the sense, even if she is kind of lying to you, you wouldn't think she is. Or at least you would be like, well, if she's lying, it's like for a good reason. You know, it's just, you're going to trust her motivations. And then her mother was another matter entirely, and that's all that's said about that. And I was like, that seems wise. There's no reason to follow up with that. So she met a member of the Council of Moongrave and assured him there would be no further damage to the city, that the clan would cover expenses. She asked about his family and found that his youngest daughter had not only reached low gold, but was showing great promise in applying her sacred arts to fledgling delivery business, which I was like, is this Kiki? Is it Kiki that we're talking about? Distant relatives who were only technically members of the Akura clan came to her with questions, but what they really wanted to know was that they had access to the head family. She answered their questions, heard their problems, and dropped in details about their situations to show that she was paying attention. And that is the kind of thing that's really invaluable, remembering details. I can be good at that at times and really bad at others. It's what it is usually is that I remember weird details. So the more important stuff, like people's names, completely do not remember. But if they were like introduced in a conversation and they described in great detail the car they drove, that I would wind up remembering and be like, oh yeah, you're the one with the Corvette. And they'd be like, yeah, I am. So for one thing, all the Dreadgods were awake at once. Most people didn't know they were more powerful and intelligent than usual, but all four hadn't rampaged at the same time since the Dread War. That made people understandably upset, especially since everyone in the city had seen the Wandering Titan attempt to cross a portal to attack Moongrave. And it had not occurred to me, you guys, that the portal was into Moongrave directly. So there were people already in the city who just see a portal open and then a Dreadgod standing there. I was only thinking about it as being, honestly, what I was imagining was that the portal opened to like a hallway. And you weren't actually in Moongrave, but you weren't actually still in what was the name of the town that they had been at? You were kind of in an in-between place, like a pocket area. It didn't occur to me that like they're coming into a city. There's just a description of buildings collapsing. I don't know why I'm thinking there's buildings in like a hallway. That would not make any sense. Anyway, I just wanted to mention how much of a dodo I am. So she is trying to like reassure while being as vague as she can. She doesn't want to tell people exactly what was going on there. And the whole thing with like Ethan and him going up into the heavens and the stars going out is a whole other issue. A lot of folks kind of thought that that was Malice that did it just to them. They didn't realize that it was genuinely happening like worldwide. Other people think it's the Dreadgod maybe did something. And she is attempting to kind of like put them at ease without actually giving them any information. But the thing that's really making Mercy twitchy is how much her mother seems disturbed by it. Because her mom is so unfazable a lot of the time. And we saw just how much her mother broke down and completely started to set aside everything that she works for because of the imminent death she thought she was going to suffer. And obviously that shit has not stuck. There was a moment there of thinking, oh, maybe she's like seeing the light and gonna nope, not happening. And a construct busts into her space and tells her the Titan has changed course. It has not stayed to feed on the tower. I repeat, the Wandering Titan has not remained in place to feed. It is marching due northwest. We project it is on a straight line course to Moongrave. So after just like telling everybody, don't worry, it's not coming here, we're fine, it's coming here. They are not fine. I really feel for her on this. And she is just really overwhelmed because she has done this once already. And that Titan was really weakened. And this is a powered up Titan. She does not want to fucking do this again. So she cancels all of her visitors and she's looking through her book. And what I love about this, she's already trying to think of how she can get ahead a little bit. So she's already in line with what Lindon is thinking. She sent her spiritual awareness to the 6th page. The Archlord level Madra was too much for her to handle right now, and Aunt Charity had advised her to slowly reach the peak of Overlord before she moved on. She had already advanced faster than her aunt thought was wise, so now she couldn't express interest in the 6th page without causing trouble, but she could peek on her own. And then Malice appears, and Mercy slams her book shut, all guilty, and then realizes that looked pretty bad probably, and her mother knows exactly what she was doing. And when her mom kind of smirks at her and is like, "What are you doing?" Mercy says, "I heard about the Titan coming and I'm kind of freaking out." And her mom is like, yeah. These days really fucking suck. Unusually bad. I do not care for it. And Mercy asks, "How much danger are we in?" And Malice says, "Less than we were from the heavenly invaders." I'm not sure that's true at all. What do you even... I can't tell if she believes that. This is the part I'm getting hung up on. I know that the monarchs all sort of view the Abaddon as bullshit. And to a degree, I can understand that. Because the Abaddon do kind of seem like cops, but worse. So I get her feeling in general of ambivalence toward them. But thinking they're in danger is a different thing entirely, and I don't see that. So this whole thing is really kind of fucking Mercy up because Ethan was one of those guys, and her mother knows that. And so anybody who was in contact with him is obviously going to be under her suspicion. So Mercy's trying here to throw off a little of her suspicion from Lindon and Yaren, saying, "I don't think that they knew." To which Malice is like, "Oh, I don't think they did. But that doesn't mean that he hasn't positioned them exactly where he fucking needs them to do whatever it is that he's planning on, which they may be not aware of either." So whether they're aware or not, they are still potentially really dangerous. And Mercy says, "I know them. I can make sure they stay our friends." You can befriend anyone as long as you're not in competition. They are valuable allies to us, and if they help us weather this crisis and join their master in the heavens, then I will remember them fondly. They'd be more likely to cooperate if I could talk to them. Let's assume that for whatever reason, they began to see me as a rival. And Mercy doesn't even know how to compute that, and doesn't get a chance to ask why that would ever happen. And Malice asks, "What do you think their first move would be?" And she says, "Advance." They don't really do anything else. So the first solution they would come up with is to advance. And I'm like, well, she knows them well. Yes, indeedy. And then, if they have you at their side, I know you think they'd use me to get to you or turn me against you. But that's not true. Yaren wouldn't even think of it. And Lindon... And she thinks to herself, if he had a plan, he wouldn't tell me. Or he would warn me and then just do what he felt like. And it's interesting to see that while there is an aspect of him using Mercy to get to her mother in the plan that he has, it's not as specific as her mother is making it out to be, because it's just that she's a monarch. That's it. The way that her mother is framing everything is to make it seem as if somehow Lindon is against the Akuras in general. And we know that's not it. But she's being so manipulative with her information that she's really got Mercy kind of paranoid here. And I was relieved later, at least, that it seems Mercy gets over it to a degree. But I just, this whole thing. So given all that, you can see why I'm less than thrilled that Lindon is on his way. And of course, Mercy is shocked that he's coming. And then she also assumes he's got everybody with him. So when she finds out he's alone, she's just like, what the fuck? So she thinks, well, probably it's because he heard the Titan is coming here and he's trying to help because the Titan fucked his people right up. So he kind of has a personal grievance there. And Malice is like, well, maybe. And then I admit I was looking forward to using the labyrinth for our own ends. What does that mean, though? Mercy just straight does not ask. And I want her to be more curious. She's just not the type. She's just not a suspicious type, you know? She needs to be a little bit more. Like, she's not stupid. But she just, I feel like she has been so sort of sheltered by being the favorite child of a monarch that she doesn't feel the need to be suspicious because she hasn't ever been threatened in a substantial way politically that could like really do anything to her. She was so protected so much of the time. Even when she went out like on her own, her name protected her. And I mean this, you know, obviously she's risked her life. That's a different thing though. The idea that there are like machinations, it doesn't seem like she really worries about it. She seems like the type of person who really thinks, if I don't get personally enmeshed in the politics, then the politics won't touch me. And that's simply not reality. You can try and hold yourself apart, but shit's going to be happening with or without you. And if you get yourself involved, at least you can like handle the narrative a little bit. You may not have total control, but you're able to push and pull in places to make it go slightly in a direction, you know? But yeah, Mercy just doesn't think this way, and she kind of needs to like wise up at this point. She is at an age and a place with like her advancement that it's gonna start to matter that she doesn't consider things from this perspective. So his cloud ship, Malice decides to like bring him to the gates of the city. And Mercy is like, why didn't we just bring him in? And Malice says, I want to see what he'll do. So he comes out and he is greeted by Akura Justice, who is the one who trained Lindon, or didn't train him. He tested Lindon to see if he met the requirements to be uncrowned. He is the one who tested Lindon's lifeline and yelled heavens above when it turned out to be extremely powerful. So I just really, it's funny because he seems to be very nervous about Lindon's attitude toward him. And I was like, I'm sure he remembers you. There's no way he forgot you. But also, I don't think he really cares. So, a pleasure to meet you again. Gratitude for your assistance in the Uncrowned King tournament. From above, Mercy saw Justice tighten his hands behind his back. From what she gathered, Justice hadn't expected much out of Lindon prior to the tournament. He must have done or said something he regretted now. I mean, he wasn't like that harsh. He just kind of was like, I don't think you probably should be here. Realized he was wrong and was like, okay, I guess you're fine. And that's kind of, I mean, he wasn't, I don't know. He was condescending, but like no more than a million other people Lindon has dealt with. So Lindon says that he wants an audience with Mercy. And Malice tells Justice, tell him no. And Justice, of course, just starts sweating, like having to be in this position. I love so much that later on, Lindon specifically says, I think that you were put in a shitty position. So sorry about that. Like, he's completely aware Justice isn't the one. So he's like, well, you know, she's really busy and with the Titan coming. And then Lindon's like, the Titan? What? And it's clear he wasn't aware the Titan was heading in their direction now. So Malice is looking at Mercy like, interesting. So you thought that was why he was here. Turns out he didn't even know about that. So I guess not. You're making this bigger than it is, Mercy protested. Perhaps I am. Perhaps he's grown bored of a girl who only knows how to swing a sword. Or perhaps it is as I feared and he is trying to get to me through you. Why would he do that? Who knows? I just truly... I can't stand her. Like, I love her because she is just so well drawn. You know everything about who Malice is. She's just a distinct character. And a part of me just loves that about her. And then she's just so greasy with the way she decides to handle stuff. And I find her so despicable. You know, it's like, especially the foil of her versus Mercy. They could not be more opposite in the way they look at the world. And how easily she's able to handle Mercy. I really wish that Mercy could see her mother more clearly and thus manipulate her back. But it just doesn't work like that. So then she tries to tell Justice to tell him he can't come into the city. And there's a whole back and forth. I love this moment. A spear swept at him like a staff and it stopped against Lindon's right hand. He hadn't used either of his full body enforcer techniques. Malice raised an eyebrow. He has quite the impressive physique for a sage. Mother! Don't worry, he's too young for me, but not for you. I really do kind of want more of this, of women just sort of salivating over Lindon a little bit, because I just keep saying he sounds hot AF. And his entire vibe. Like, I got to imagine that there are going to be women throwing themselves at him. And I'm not mad at Will for not writing more of that into the thing. Because to a point, that can get gross, like, depending on how it's done. But it's little moments like that where I'm like, Malice, you won me back over a little bit again. I hate you for that. So, finally, she's like, okay, you can let him in, but he can't see her yet. Take him on a tour of the city. And we go into Lindon's POV, and he is kind of irritated, first of all, with the fact that his time is being wasted here. Second of all, that he is being led on this, like, tour, which he actually does find really interesting, which somehow makes it worse. And Dross tells him she wants to keep us lost in the mists of doubt, make us think that she's testing us only to strike when we least expect it. And I was like, that's actually pretty much true, I think. I don't know that she's actually trying to provoke a specific reaction. I think she just wants to know the way he's going to handle shit. I really do. I think she's just not really sure she knows Lindon and is attempting to see what his personality is like and how driven he is by what the stakes are at this point. So we have poor Justice who's having to, like, host him in this way. And Lindon's like, dude, there's a Dreadgod coming. Don't you think we should hurry? And he has to put him off. And finally, much later, Lindon found himself asking questions about the decorative trees that grew all over Moongrave. This is so wild. They're wide-petaled glowing flowers that came in several different colors. The tree they inspected at the moment had blossoms of white, violet, and blue growing from the same branches, all shining in the darkness. They flourish in abundant shadow aura. Their species was initially taken from Everwood, but now we have the only native population, so it's known as Moongrave Amphelia. Their species was initially taken from Everwood, was it? I don't know. I just hear colonizer in there somewhere. It just feels like, just feels shady. I don't know. Anyway, So they're in the middle of this, and finally they feel a spirit approaching them. And Mercy shows up and is like, hey, I'm really sorry. I saw you at the gate, but I couldn't do anything. And Lindon's sort of surprised at the fact that her mother let her see everything, and asks if he passed her test. And she's like, I don't fucking know. I mean, what is even going on here? And why don't I show you my office? And he says, all right, lead the way. So they go up to her office, which is at the top of this like tower, and a pretty distinctive spot. And he uses his command of his authority to say silence and keep anybody from hearing them. Now, I'm going to say this. I do not trust that Malice can't hear through this. I want desperately to believe that she can't. I am not really sure. Who I'm trusting really is Dross, and that he could account for whether Malice is able to go like penetrate this or not. And I'm hoping he knows what he's talking about. But the idea of trying to hide anything from a monarch feels so pointless that, and this is sort of where I run into a little bit of wobbliness in terms of knowing what people are capable of depending on the power level that they're at, you know? I mean, an archlord, sure. Another sage, sure. A monarch, I don't know about that. I just, So I spent this entire conversation paranoid that he is just showing his entire hand. And the thing is, anytime that Lindon is anywhere near Mercy, I have to assume Malice is going to be watching. Because what I'm saying is, even if they weren't here in Akura territory, if he's having a conversation with Mercy, I feel like Malice is likely going to be watching. So I don't know how better to do this. But anyway, people are saying the idea is she could break it, but he would notice. And like, I hope so. But this is what I mean. I don't know. So he says, I should have warned you, but I've made it so your mother can't hear us. And she gets really tense and asks what we're talking about. And then he says, your mother swore me not to speak of certain matters. Has she told you why? And Mercy gets real confused and is like, do you mean Ethan? And he's relieved that she doesn't know, which I think comes from just, if she did know, that would be kind of fucked up, you know, in the midst of everything. But also, her not knowing obviously complicates it, because now he can't tell her or talk to her about it. And he says, if she hasn't told you, he had to let it hang there. He had thought too hard about dropping her a hint. Instead, he moved on to his main proposal. How do you feel about robbing your mother? Lindon asked. Mercy's purple eyes grew wide, and I was just like, oh, man. I feel like if you had just put it in another way, that wording right after the conversation they just had feels just, I don't know. I'm hoping that, I don't know. It just feels like Malice really has got him set up pretty well. She knows what she's doing, you know? So then we go to chapter 8. We leave them behind and we go to Yaren and Little Blue. Little Blue is not having a great time. She is trembling, just so anxious. All of this, like being away from Lindon in this way, being in territory. Do you guys remember how she used to react to Yaren because of her blood shadow? She was terrified of her, and it took a while before she started to be cool with her. Little Blue's sense of fear around them and the threat they pose is very real. So to see her like fighting one in this chapter is truly wild. So we get to see Red Faith and Red Moon talking to each other. And it's so wonderful. I knew that this would be funny, but it really, really is. I always am a fan of the trope of a person arguing with another copy of themselves, however that might have worked out, in the media. But there's just something about that feels so frustrating, because we all spend half our day arguing with ourselves to begin with. Let's be honest. That's just how a lot of us live. And the idea of there being an actual physical manifestation of a copy of us standing in front of us going, "You dumb asshole. What is wrong with you? You know that's not going to work. You always fuck this up." Oh my God, I would be so irritated. It would there's no winning against you, really. How do you even... So what we have then is this conversation between the two of them about the Bleeding Phoenix and the opposing ways they each view it. So it turns out that Red Moon's faction sees the Phoenix as kind of a deity, whereas Red Faith is the Phoenix is a path to power. It's a resource. It's not a sacred being, though. And the two of them can't seem to get out of each other's way on that. Finally, Red Moon kind of capitulates to Red Faith, who is I am going to be doing the experiments and monitoring Yeren. If you think that you, a herald, are going to do this, then you can just suck my dick, because that's not happening. And what I found really compelling here is that, obviously, when we go into Yeren's memories, the moment that she and Ruby are able to sort of connect and merge together is marked by their goals lining up with one another. And it's very clear these two do not have that going on, and they may never have it going on. I have no idea if they would ever get there, but they have such polar opposite viewpoints on how to handle all of this. It's no wonder that they aren't working together, And honestly, talking about arguing with a copy of yourself, I really don't know if a copy of me would be on the same side as me on certain big issues or not. I hope so. But I don't know. Anyway, so finally, they split up, and the Blood Sage takes her into this laboratory, essentially. He walks in, and she doesn't pay attention to the fact that she sort of lingers and is not looking super comfy about this whole thing. And he doesn't help by saying, "Sit so that I may examine you. I can bind you if you wish, but the pain will be minor, negligible to one of your constitution and advancement. Have you had any mental enhancements?" And she is just "Oh boy, I know Yeren's given me, or Lindon has given me some stuff to deal with emergency situations. And I know that this isn't an emergency situation, but it feels like it is, because this guy is just so threatening, and I just hate it here. I hate all of this. But finally she's and she kind of comes to the conclusion that I came to last episode, where I said, this guy doesn't strike me as a liar. He just seems insane. And that's basically what she is also thinking. She's yeah, I don't think that he's gonna mislead me. I think that he is just going to do what he thinks needs doing, with a full expectation that I will agree with him about it. Which, yeah, yep. So what she is thinking is that she's just going to put all of her memories onto a dream tablet. And he is see, here's the thing. Your memories are going to be inadequate for the kind of record that we need. So I have this mental elixir, and I'm going to inject you with it. And it's going to enhance your mind temporarily. And that way, you are going to make a dream tablet that's a lot clearer and more effective. And I really wanted her to let him inject her. I am not going to lie to you guys. She puts up a fuss and eventually just tells him, I'm not doing it. You're going to take what I give you. And while I definitely respect that, I just kind of felt like, I don't know, man, it's probably fine. Like, he doesn't seem to want to hurt you. And I just don't see. So she says, essentially, she asks him, swear on your soul that this won't knock me out, slow me down, or hurt me, and then I'll let you use it. And he hesitates. And it says, the sage hesitated, confirming her suspicions, which I think suggests that it could, like, hurt her or knock her out, and he knows that. But I am not entirely sure that it does mean that. I'm wondering if it's just sort of, he doesn't want to swear that, and then it maybe goes a little wrong. And, it may just be, there's always the possibility it doesn't go to plan, and he just doesn't want to, wager his power on an outcome that isn't completely guaranteed 100%, because a guy who thinks like him is going to acknowledge that fraction of a percent possibility that it could go wrong. I don't know. I just, I got what she was feeling, but I felt sort of like, it's fine, Yaren. I just don't think he's a threat to you right now. So, yeah, she says, let's try it like normal first, and I won't gut this ship on my way out. So, finally, he caves, and we get to revisit her memories with her. And the first one is the moment where Lindon drew the blood shadow out of her core when she was passed out during the Bleeding Phoenix attack, when Malice was fighting it in her crazy amethyst crystal armor. And what is interesting here is we get the first moment of the hunger of his Madra connecting with the hunger of the blood shadow. And I have got to be straight with you all. I have not put together the fact that they both have hunger aspects going on in their Madra. I just really have been just sort of viewing it as blood, and that's all she needs. And the hunger part of it, I don't feel like I even realized that was as much of a thing. It wasn't I knew that the blood shadows had a sort of hunger to them, but I don't think I realized that that was a Madra that she needed to cultivate at all. So it's really surprising to me that she is a partner to a man who's one of his main sources of power is hunger Madra, and she is just not doing anything with that. What a missed opportunity. She could have been taking so much advantage over their mutual need for this and just wasn't. That sucks. So anyway, he then asks her, in order to get the next memory, when did you begin practicing my techniques for a humanoid blood shadow? What was your motivation for doing so? And what was your experience using them? And this, having been just doing the reread, is in the Nightwheel Valley, I believe, is when Ethan first gives her the dream tablets that have the information about how this works. And it's so funny because she's in the mind of Sage of Red Faith and just hates being there. She just really detests having to do this. And Ethan offers her a couple of other dream tablets with alternate options, but does the same thing with her that he did with Lindon, which is to say, pretends that she has a bunch of different paths, but makes it extremely clear that really only one of them is truly any sort of option if she wants to advance more than the average person would. And essentially, you've got to take a big risk to get big rewards. And most people don't. And you don't have to. But if you don't, you're going to get pretty much not what you want. So that's the first time where he's like really aggressive with her about it, because up till that point he hadn't been paying as much attention to her as he had to Lindon. So when she tells Red Faith that Ethan was the one pushing this on her, Red Faith is so delighted. And I can't imagine. This is a heavenly messenger, so everybody keeps kind of calling him, who thought your shit was so legit that they were being extremely aggro about getting one of their disciples to follow your teaching. How do you get, like, you know, I don't even know what to compare that to. This is like finding out Beyonce listens to my podcast and recommends it to her friends. Like, I would just drop dead. It would just be the end of my life. So every time I try and think about somebody who is like akin to a heavenly messenger, I think of Beyonce. She's like the only person that I think of, which I just feel like she really did nail her branding, didn't she? Because I can't think of another soul that I would describe in this way. But she is so not in the tabloids that often about anything like trashy and personal, except when she decides that she's going to be in because she made a whole album about it. That is a real control of a narrative that I admire. Anyway, so this memory that she has here is of when Mira takes a bunch of her lifeline away. And she fights with the blood shadow for the first time. She remembered eyeing the shadow, afraid it would devour her from the inside out. She remembered eyeing her host body, afraid that it would devour her from the outside in. As they proceeded, the sage complained less and less. He muttered about clarifying levels of existence and developing identity, but whenever Yeren came back to herself, he insisted she move on to the next memory. Whatever he wasn't satisfied about with the clarity, he seemed to be growing excited. There was one set of memories she tried to suppress. Ruby's growing awareness of Lindon was too embarrassing to share because it mirrored her own. Now, Yeren knew for sure the Blood Shadow's initial attachment to him came from Yeren's own thoughts, her own attention, her own dreams and feelings. And this is one of those things where the embarrassing aspect of it is so cute to me. Like, she's just not great with emotions. And I am not either, to be perfectly honest, but I'm also a lot more like open about that. She just doesn't even want to admit that she has an issue with it. And I can't be mad at the fact that this is like some weird fucking dude who has been a major threat to you in a variety of ways and has also been the head of an organization that has allowed blood shadows to like rip families apart like yours. Letting him see something you're being so vulnerable in is not gonna be fun. I don't blame her for it, but just her like kind of being like, I don't want him to see it. It's just so funny. And she eventually does go, all right, I'm being a little bitch, and she lets him see, but it takes a minute for her to like chill out enough to allow it. So then she came to Ruby, receiving an independent body and then a name, then time of her own, time spent with Lindon, a few days of freedom. Though it was her own memory, Yeren dreaded reliving the moment of combining with Ruby. She knew it wasn't the case, but she somehow felt like it was the instant of Ruby's death. Instead, she felt the two of them grow more and more similar, even before they combined. Their mutual concern about losing the Uncrowned King tournament made their thoughts almost identical. Their fears became one. As Yeren, she felt like she had put down a burden she'd been carrying all her life. As Ruby, she felt like she'd finally been released from prison. Now she had all the freedom she wanted. Yeren stared off into the distance. She didn't notice that the lens and dream tablet had been removed until the blood sage handed her a handkerchief. Only then did she realize her cheeks were wet. I loved this so much, you guys. this made me so happy because, like, honestly, their combining did kind of feel like it wasn't great for Ruby. It felt like Ruby sort of sacrificing herself in a way. And finding out that's not how Ruby feels about it at all is very encouraging. It's just helpful to know that, you know? Like, even though I can see aspects of Ruby in Yeren now, you know, because her eyes change color and everything, it still just kind of felt like what happens when you absorb a remnant and you just kind of take its power, but none of its actual real personality seems to come through necessarily. Or it's not like, do you know what I mean? So discovering that it was a relief for both of them and sort of them each getting what they had been wanting for a really long time, it was just a really nice thing to know. And I can understand why she was sort of choked up by that. And for a moment, him like giving her the handkerchief, she's just like, thanks. And then he says, compose yourself. We can't get anything useful out of you in that state. I will analyze your experiences and we will continue tomorrow when you're useful again. In the meantime, I need blood samples. Before you resort to violence, understand, I am not injecting you with anything. Do you understand? Empty. I am extracting a sample of your blood, not injecting you with anything. And he's taking her silence as that she doesn't understand what he means. So he then is like going to demonstrate. This is one of my favorite things when here and then later, he just assumes that her having a certain reaction means that she doesn't understand the basics of something. And there was something simultaneously like insulting about it, but also I appreciate that he's willing to go down to the bare basics and just kind of take it in stride. Like, all right, I'll explain what, you know what I mean? I don't know. I just found that really funny. So at this point, she says, take all my blood if it means you keep your teeth together. I'll be taking a tissue and Modular sample as well, but those can wait until you have regained control of yourself. Did you train to make people hate you, or is that some kind of bloodline technique? I say what I say, and I do what I do, without any regard for the opinion of others at all. It has always been strange to me that others don't do the same. I'd say you'd have an easier time with your research if you didn't act like you were hunting babies to eat. Yes, I imagine people would likely cooperate more readily if they didn't see me as a deranged cultist. That is more Red Moon's niche than mine, but there is always some name people will call you. Before cultist, I was called the mad tool of a Dreadgod. Before that, a crazed researcher of forbidden knowledge. Earlier still, it was Ghost Child. And I was like, it was what now? She doesn't ask. I want to know. Ghost Child? What the fuck, why? That's a weird one. I don't like it. So she has a moment of kind of going, I guess I see what he means. And then has to remind herself of like all the damage that he has done and steel herself up again. And yeah, I could really understand how that would happen. So finally she hops out of her chair and is like, are we done? And he hands her a piece of paper and says, these are the analysis results. They will guide your own sacred arts. And while you're here, I expect you will qualitatively benefit from my guidance on your techniques, which you could have received earlier had you cooperated. And he hands her the paper. And I had forgotten that she couldn't read. And he kind of brings up like, oh yeah, you can't read. I'll just read it to you. And I really, again, I forgot you were uneducated. I'll read it to you. There's no real judgment in that. It's just sort of like, oh yeah, no, it's fine. I'll do it. I don't know. There's something about his attitude that I kind of like appreciate. These are the things that make me go, yeah, I'm not neurotypical. I'm just not. Because this whole vibe that he has is somebody who is not neurotypical, communicating in a way that they're like, this is the most efficient way to say this, and I don't get why people are in their feelings about it. And that's so often how I feel about stuff. And I have to like bring myself down and remind myself of how I can emotionally react to stuff, and like, how would you feel? And like, sometimes I would not feel the thing at all that they are clearly feeling, but sometimes I would. It's just the kind of like directness here. It's very easy to read into what he's saying as if he's being insulting, but he's not actually saying anything insulting. I forgot you were uneducated. She isn't. You know, she's gotten some education very recently, as it turns out. I'll read it to you. He's just being helpful, you know, but another person saying that same sentence, it could drip with judgment. I forgot you're uneducated. I'll read it to you. Totally different delivery, totally different meaning. And a lot of folks who are used to dealing with passive-aggressive, shitty people hear that tone whether it's there or not. So you have to be so careful, especially when you are dealing in a medium that is solely text. If it's text messaging or comments on a page or something, and you have that kind of tone and you don't soften it, it can come across like you have that sort of attitude, but it's not really what you meant. It's just that kind of sentence has been weaponized and made passive aggressive. So if you aren't passive aggressive and people are putting their baggage of interpreting shit as passive aggressive on you, they can take offense at like everything you say. And just having been on the receiving end of that, like, I have a really hard time with dealing with people who are passive aggressive. And I kind of shut down, to be perfectly honest, because it's so much effort to dissect what they're actually trying to say out of what they're saying. And it's so much effort to figure out how to communicate with them in a way that they're not going to take offense because they see what you're saying through the lens of how they would mean it if they said the same thing. It's so tiring. And it's the kind of thing that I try to be aware of the fact that folks who are passive aggressive are often like that because they've been punished for being direct so many times in their life that they've realized that's not a safe thing to do. And I try so hard to keep that in mind, but it's really hard when your instinct is to just say a thing and you're talking to somebody who not only doesn't get that, but will be mad at you if you do it. Trying to couch everything. It's just a lot of effort. So anyway, a lot of people in the chat are sort of feeling me on this one. It's purely practical, but it sounds like an attack. Yeah. That's exactly it. I'm being like, I'll say something because I'm just like, this is something that also happens when I ask a question. And I am very intense when I'm trying to learn something or understand where somebody's coming from. And I'll ask a question and I'll have a sort of look. And I've been told that the way I ask and the expression on my face makes it look like I'm challenging them. When really I'm just like, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding why you want it done that way. Can you explain that? And I have a look that's sort of like, what the fuck do you mean? And that's not my vibe. I want to know why it's done a certain way, because if you know why, then if something should go wrong later, then you know how to like mitigate the damage, because knowing why it was done this way means that you can find an alternate way to get to the same result. It's just a good way of having a sort of backup plan. Anyway, all of this to say, I don't like Red Faith, but I like understand him. I feel like I'm sort of getting him. So anyway, let's see. B Moore says they take even more offense than normal because it's a symptom of them projecting their self-judgment onto themselves. Selection bias makes it something they're sensitive about. Exactly. It's really like, I have had people say, so-and-so said this to me and it sounds awful. And then they will send me a screenshot of the convo and that person said nothing of the kind. And they just interpreted a whole thing out of a conversation that was not there. And it's because they have their filter that they see things through. And it's wild. It makes me so nervous because seeing that they do that makes me go, what are they going to read into when I'm just trying to be like straightforward about it? It's kind of like freaks me out, you know? But, anyway, Asher says, I mean, it can be a fine line, I guess, but that uncertainty is probably due to me always deliberately not being an asshole because of all the times I've been accused of being one. Mixed Shard says, no, I'm not trying to insult you. I'm genuinely curious why you're doing it like this. I'm assuming you know something I don't, not that I have to correct you. Thank you. That's exactly it. I am assuming you know something that I don't. And it's probably helpful if I know it. So can you fill me in? That's literally all I'm asking. You know? So anyway, okay, moving on. I'm sorry, everybody. He says that she has an aspect deficiency and modular imbalance. And this is when we find out about the hunger thing. And she thinks that he means she's not going to be able to move on and advance again. And he's like, no, you can. You're definitely like right there if you want to. But you have the ability to like incorporate this whole other thing and round out your ability to get the most out of it. And you're not doing that. So advancement, yeah, you could do, but this isn't about that. Advancement isn't the only thing. There's like quality over quantity, essentially. And then she says, so if I do this, how powerful can I get? And he essentially says, I just don't know. A lot of power. And finally, she's going, all right, so if I need this sort of Madra, you got a lot of people out there, chock full of it. Do you allow fights? And he's like, you can't just kill them and take their blood shadow. We do not like that. That's a real party foul. However, fights are fine. We allow that, and, you know, you're important to us, so we're not going to, like, fuck with it. But just kind of try and restrain yourself like a little bit. And then she says, I've got one more condition. I have a partner. And I will admit, totally had forgotten about Little Blue by this point. Really had. No offense, Little Blue. So she goes outside and she finds this dude who has the wildest gold sign. I hate this so much. He has I'm going to read this. His blood shadow floated around his midsection in a ring and sprouted needles in time with his heartbeat. Can you imagine? That is that is so creepy. No. Dislike. And Yeren is looking at him and he has all these scars and is just obviously somebody who is a fucking badass. And she's going, hey, I would like your blood shadow, please. And he's like, oh, okay. They're going to protect you from me, though. And she basically says, well, I might be running this place soon. So if they, decide that they're going to follow me, it'll be for my power, which you can take if you want to try. Who knows what my blood essence would do for you? Can't say I do. Got to imagine that would be a good test for the sage. Wouldn't be bad for them either if I took your shadow and ate it like a nighttime snack, so I can't see them twitching a finger to save either of us. Does a duel sound sweeter to you now? And they engage in this fight that, long story short, she wins. He isn't dead by the end of it. She just pulls his blood shadow out. And he impales her through the stomach. And I had a real moment, guys, of being like, she's fine though, right? Like, we know that she's fine. She is fine. She can recover from that quite easily, actually. But it was, I had a moment. So she uses her Moonlight Bridge here, and she uses it more than once. which I thought you got one use and then it had to recharge. But I think it must be that you get one use and it has to recharge if you go a really long distance, and maybe just doing it like, so in such an immediate space, it's fine, I think. So she uses it. She appears above him. She punches him. He tries to block her in several different ways, and she just breaks through all of them. His half-dispersed blood shadow was crawling together, but Yaren stole a chunk of it. She couldn't yet consume it like Lindon could, but Red Faith had given her pointers on drawing in blood essence, and the nature of a blood shadow was to find a new host. When she pulled on it, the fraction of the blood shadow joined her spirit. Instead of satisfying her appetite, she felt a new spike of hunger. Ruby knew that feeling. That meant it was working. So then, Lil Blue comes out. And she's a little freaked because this blood shadow is like right there. And then she pulls the hunger spear out of Yaren's soul. And I'm like, oh my God, she's got an ancestor spear. I forgot that, like, Lindon found that and he gave it to Little Blue. Can you imagine if we went back to the second book and Lindon was like, the ancestor spear? I mean, I guess if you have like a 2-inch tall spirit, sure, I guess it's something. Like, we have come quite a long way. That's all I'm saying. And Yaren says likely be easier if you were bigger, which evidently she could just control. So she could be bigger, but she doesn't want to be bigger, which I think is really interesting. And she sticks the end of the spear into the blood shadow and then begins to pull its power up into her. And she begins to turn like purple and does it until she can't hold anymore and has to drop it. And Yaren says, so, do you know how to cycle it? Little Blue chirped brightly, though she looked tired. Yaren propped the spirit up on her shoulder. Then she looked out of the circle of devastation her battle had left to the remaining Red Moon Hall members. Left him alive, she announced. Then she hefted Netherclaw. So, who's up next? And that is the end of the chapter. So, I am very excited to see Little Blue's growth because I genuinely do not know what the fuck she is going to be. Like, we don't really see her fight by herself really that often. I think it like twice maybe. And all I can think of are the bloopers from Uncrowned where Lindon is going in thinking it's Sofara, and instead of it being Yaren like it actually is, it's Little Blue, and she pulls a knife and starts to run at him. But anyway, but yeah, I'm really, really excited. So let me see the next section. Do I get 2 chapters again? Yes, I do. Chapters 9 and 10, kiddos, on Thursday. Reminder, all the recordings have moved from Fridays to Thursdays from here on out. So just to give you guys a reminder there. So yeah, I will see you then. And I just can't believe that this is the second to last book. Ugh, I don't even want to think about it. All right. I'm going to wrap. Thank you, guys. I'll see you then. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.